Hey everybody, Rory from A&S Gear here, and we are going to look at the brand new Dye M3S today. We're going to go over it, we'll do a breakdown on it, we will compare it to the M2 so you guys can see some differences between the two guns. So we've got an M3 here. We're going to remove the barrel because we really don't need that for anything. And we have an M2, so let's take the barrel off of that one. I'll put that down. That off to the side. So a couple things you're going to see right from the bat here, or right off the bat, I shouldn't say from the bat, is feed neck. The feed neck is different. The lever is actually larger, and they've made it to the point where you cannot swivel it before. Before on these, to adjust them, you could turn these to tighten or loosen them, and you could also put an Allen key in the back if you needed to fine-tune adjust it, but now they've given you a much larger knob that you can grab onto and you can turn by hand. So if you need to do that fine-tune adjustment, open it up a little bit and then tighten it down. Open it up, back it up, tighten it down, whatever you need to do. So it makes it much easier to do by hand should you feel the need to. Now you can also still stick an Allen key in there. You can turn it that way too. Either way, it's up to you, but don't need one. Let's see here. Let's kind of just go overall. We're going to go overall before we start taking things apart. You can see that the grip right here, this front grip, is a little bit larger than it was before. The spacing is a little bit different from grip frame to regulator right here. The reg itself is different. We'll get into that when we get inside there. No longer do you need to remove a screw in the front of this to get the front grip off. This one has a screw right there that you need to pull out in order to slide the front grip down. You don't need that anymore. You can just pop that thing right off there and go from there. Coming around the grip frame, obviously just the design of the grip frame has changed, and the size of the body in this section has changed, and there's a reason for that. If you remove the grips under here, you'll see that the M2 has an LPR inside there. The M3 does not, so there is no low pressure regulator inside the M3. The operating pressure of the bolt to cycle back and forth and to move is the same pressure used to shoot the ball at velocity, which they're saying is about 115 psi, so there's no need for an LPR anymore. There's no need to run a secondary pressure through the solenoid to achieve bolt movement, as well as another pressure to achieve shot velocity. And we can see that a lot of guns these days aren't doing that. The Lux doesn't have an LPR. The CS2s, sorry, and the CS 1.5. And the CSs haven't had an LPR on them ever, I don't believe. Or the Geos, I should say. So you don't need an LPR to make the gun work properly. You can have one. There's nothing against having one in there. But in the whole age of making things more streamlined, easier to work on, less problematic, it's a smart move in that direction to get the LPR out of the gun. So that being said, I'm sure everybody's got an issue with it, or a side that they like to be on, but in this setup right here, M2 has it, M3S does not. All right, grips, we're still running the same Moss Air system, method operating system, so the interface is the same, the joystick on the back is the same. Airport at the bottom, same setup in there. Obviously the bolt is very different between the two, and just the overall size of the body is different. So that being said, let's where should we go from here? Let's just start at the front. So we're gonna pull the grip off. We'll start with the regulator. You guys can see the difference between those. Pull that off of there. Keep our M3 stuff on this side. I need this. Get this off. Weight-wise, the guns weigh almost the same amount. So I think it was like 1 pound 10 ounces or so between the two. So weight is not really a factor in this one. So that's there. So we can see regulator lengthwise, the reg is actually slightly longer. Kind of trying to measure these up right here. It's about the same. I thought I had the gun sitting up a little too high. Right there. So the regs are about the same length. The gun is I believe, shorter. Let me see if I can line these up for you guys to see. I want to make sure my feet necks are in the same spot. Yeah, right there. So you can see on the back side, shorter. And this one sticks out a little bit further on the front right here, the M2. So the M3 is a shorter setup. All right, so regulators. You can see the difference in the body right here on the M2 compared to the M3. So this is where your LPR would be sitting, or is sitting, I should say, in the M2. No need for it in the M3, so you've got rid of that section right there. Now, in order to get them out on the M2 before, you would undo the cartridge or use an Allen key and unscrew the cartridge out of the bottom, like so. And then once you had the cartridge up high enough, you could grab it and pull it out. Remember, the M2 uses a shim stack inside there, so you always want to be careful. Sometimes when you pull out a set or a piston and the cartridge out, one of the shims will stick to the cartridge. And it did on this one. The shim is stuck on there. Because of the grease and stuff, it'll kind of just get stuck right there. So you always want to make sure that you take that off and replace it back on the piston. And there we go. So we've got our piston with our shim stack and our cartridge right there. This has our velocity adjuster in it. It has our piston stem O-ring inside there, our reg seat, all the stuff that, the other half of the regulator basically. On this one, so you've got this like a crosshair shape on the bottom now. You can use a nickel like I'm going to do to take this out and twist it, unscrew it out of there. You can use an Allen key and kind of line it up in the slots right there. There aren't any holes that you can like jab something into and turn it. And it definitely will not work with an Allen key or an Allen key in the middle, I should say. You can remove this rubber retainer ring out of here. Like that. This helps keep the velocity adjuster from moving too far out if you're unscrewing it. And then you can take your nickel or whatever it may be and just put it in there. And you're kind of going to get to the same spot you did with the cartridge on the other one, where it's threaded all the way out, or it's not coming out anymore. And at that point you can grab it and wiggle it and pull it out. Now from here, you can see that our cartridge, the top of our cartridge actually separated away, which is not a big deal. We want to reach in and grab the piston. We're going to pull it out. We have to make sure to be super gentle with it as we take it out of there so that we don't have any issues. We don't want to mark it up or anything. We don't want to damage the piston. I'll put this back on here. And so what I'm using to get that out, I'm using a pair of a short needle nose plier that has a rounded tip to it, a rounded point. So it doesn't have any teeth, it doesn't have any flat spots that I can mark this up. It is completely round, and I can easily grab the piston and pull it up without marking the surface or damaging it in any way. Okay, so let's talk about the differences between the two regs at this point. So the two regs, we'll talk about the piston side. So the new M3S is going with a spring, an actual spring now. And they've gone away from the double O-ring on the piston to just a single O-ring. Now this one right here, you can see they're using the shim stack, the Belleville washer stack, as well as a double ring. It's kind of a redundant system, so if one goes bad, the other one is still working. You can see that they went away from that. I think they went away from it because people lose the shims, they pull the reg apart, shims fall out, and it just, it's more stuff, more things you have to worry about. With the springs are getting so good these days that they are very consistent. Their return rates are great. They don't fatigue or fail over time like we did have them in the past. Like, I'm not talking about a long time ago, not recently. So everybody's using springs. You don't see too many shim stacks anymore. So for this application, the spring works just fine. You don't need the shim stack. Not to say that there's anything wrong with it. It's just more potential room for problems, I guess, at that point. And that's usually more from the user end than the ability of it to function properly. People lose them all the time. You have no idea how many people come in and like, I lost shims out of my regulator. Do you have any? It happens quite often. So that's our piston side. Now, as far as our cassette side, inside here, down in here, there's an O-ring that sits inside here, and it's the O-ring that goes around the piston when the piston goes through it. On all the previous die reg models, getting that O-ring in and out is probably one of the most frustrating things that I have to do. Getting it picked down in there, getting that O-ring to sit perfectly in a spot so that it doesn't move. It's got a little groove that it sits in. It's a nightmare getting those in and out. Sometimes they go in super easy. You put it in there, you push on it, and it pops right in. Other times you can spend minutes. And that might not seem like a long time, but when you're trying to do a bunch of guns and get things done during the day, minutes matter. And it can be a struggle sometimes. So I was extremely happy when I saw that the new cassette here opens up. And the piston O-ring that always gives you a problem is now sitting super easy to get to and easy to change and replace if need be. They've also changed the size. I believe they went up to an 8. It used to be an 00790 durometer urethane O-ring, a green one. They've moved up one size to an 8, 008. I'm sorry, there was a 00790 durometer. I don't know if I said 70 or not. Now it's a 00890 urethane. The piston still fits it normally, but it's just more, I don't want to say forgiving, but it just seems to have less issues than it did before with the larger O-ring, and I think it's a good change to them. This is like, when I saw this, it was like the angels had sung down to me and said, "Oh, finally." So that was super nice. So regulators right there. The actually this is different too on the inside. So on the other one right here, the brass adjuster that comes out, the reg seat just gets pushed into it. And if you need to remove it, you just stick a pick in it and you pull it out and you're done from there. This one now, let me pull the adjuster out. The reg seat is now part of its own housing. So now you've got this silver piece on there, which you didn't have before. The other adjusters is a piece of brass that has a pocket that the seat goes into, and it's a solid seat. Now this one has this cap. You can spin it off, and the reg seat sits inside of this cap right there. So if you need to get it out, you just push it out from the top, it pops out the bottom, and you're done. You've also got a purge valve inside here, so it can bleed out if necessary. So again, easy peasy right there. I like this new setup. Let's go ahead and assemble this back together. Make sure that you do tighten these down a little bit. I'm going to use that on there. Don't want to overdo it. I just want to give them enough to next time when this gun comes apart that it doesn't separate when the piston comes out. That's going to go there. We're going to tuck this little thing back in there. Just like that. So that's done. This one we can just stick together. Make sure your shims are lined up. If you don't know the orientation of your shim stack, make sure you refer to your manual for your shim stack. It's just opposite all the way up. When you've always put these back in, oh, I can't do that. You want to remember to be gentle when you put the cassette and the piston back in. You don't want to ruin those O-rings on the threading that this goes in through. So just be gentle and walk it in. Don't just mash it in there because you will have a problem with your O-rings eventually. That's tight. So you can see this O-ring, these two, this one. When I put them through here, I've got to go through the threads where the cassette threads in. So right here, I can feel it touching. I'm just going to walk it back and forth and kind of walk it over those threads. And then it'll drop by, and then walk it over the threads. And it drops by, and then we get to the point where we can thread this in. Right there. All right, so back together. Let's move on. So let's go, we'll leave the bolt to the last part. Let's get the grips off so that you guys can see the difference in the solenoid and the board now. So the board that's in the frame hasn't changed. Same board inside here using the same operating system. Now the board up top has changed. So there's actually 3 boards inside the gun. In both of these, there's 3 boards. Let's get them off of there. So another thing about the grips, people always, they love the grips and then they love to complain about the grips. I see people all the time that they rip and break this lower section of their grip and they say, oh, it just ripped. I don't know how it just ripped. I was taking it off. It was like that out of the box. I don't know if I believe that. Because when I see people take the grips off all the time, they lift these things up and they just yank the crap out of them. And they assume that they will just hold up. So what you want to do with these, the way I do this, so that I don't overstress the back here and potentially rip them, lift up the front panel, pull it forward to the point where you can get some overlap on the bottom right here. So I'm not overstressing the back side by turning them too far. And then I just get my fingers in there and I pop these things out. And then I just roll it around and do it the same to the back. I don't want to overdo the back side here because I don't want to break that. All right, so let's get the frames off. Now, on these ones, you have to do, you can either do the back all the way off first and then do the front, or do the front a little bit and then the back all the way out. But you cannot take the front screw all the way out without releasing the back screw. All right. And then let's do this one. So as you can see, the front screw is now not recessed into part of the frame in the front, and they can get away with that now because there's no LPR. That's kind of in the way. Let's get this off of here. Uh-oh! We lost it. Stuck to my Allen key and came flying out. I think I see you though. Oh yeah. It's in a bucket of Reball. There you go. So, pull that off of there. So the boards we were talking about, remember we've got main board, upper board, and then we have the connector board, which sits right here. So there's a little tiny board that sits at the top of the frame, which is our interface between the upper board and the lower board. You can see how they look between those ones. They do look different. That's because on the M2 board, they use this sprung connector that pushes against these little patches to make contact. On the new one, they're using the same connector as the DSR, where it's just like a little pocket connector, where this one fits into this little cup right there. So it just snaps into place on there. But let's look at these. So board difference. Now they were able to make a board difference now because the LPR is gone. So let's talk about that. So on the original one right here, you had 2 pressure sensors. You had one up here at the front, this side, then you have one that is right here. I believe this is your LPR and your HPR sensor. Now that there is no LPR, you don't need that board to be all the way up to the front anymore, so they can get rid of all the board that was up there and put it directly towards the back. They've also manufactured a new solenoid here because if you remember when I talked about it earlier, the pressure in the gun, before in this one, the pressure is much into the solenoid is lower. So, you're looking at like 65 PSI or so running into the solenoid, moving the bolt back and forth. Running a higher pressure into it, 115, 120, whatever these are going to run at, is not as good for this particular solenoid right here. So they came up with a new solenoid housing that is working better at that higher pressure. So new solenoid at the back. The pilot valve looks similar. It's got different marks on it, both 6-volt pilot valves, but I don't know if they're any different in there. I don't work for SMC. I couldn't tell you. But I do know that the bodies are different. Obviously, we can see that. And the board back here is different because it only needs one pressure sensor now. So just one to measure the overall pressure in the gun, and you're done. So easy peasy right there. Super simple. It's a cleaner setup. You've got less wiring to deal with. You don't have a big block of wiring up here that needs to fit in a spot. Your eye wires can just run from your eyes all the way down and then connect to the board, and your solenoid just connects right to the board. And they must think that this pocket connector system is a better deal because they switched over to it. So I would trust them on that. So that's it. That's the solenoid insides right there. You can see strikingly different in looks and overall function. All right. So I guess we can put it back together since we're sitting here. So we'll put that on. We'll put our screws back in. You can see the screw just drops right in. We don't need to set it in the frame. We just put the frame on and put it back together. And then let's put these grips on. So this is our wireless charging. They both still have the wireless charging, so that's not flopping around. Be careful when you do that. You don't want to pinch that wireless charger platform in there. You don't want to break those wires. So just be careful when you're putting that back together. And then let's do this one. So on this one, we need to take that screw, we need to set it in the frame, and then we need to line our frame up in there and tighten this down. I'm all for making it easier, so not having to do that, good. I like it. All right, let's get our board in the right spot for our charging plate. All right, so that's back together. Might as well do these ones while we're sitting here, because really the only thing left to talk about is the bolt. We'll talk about why the bolt is so different in this one. There we go. Let's pull the bolts out. Move our guns to the side a little bit. So our bolt. So the new bolt has a valve inside of it. And what it will do is it will shut down the shot chamber and not just let air blow out the end of the bolt and just waste air out the end of it when it doesn't need to be happening. So in a gun like this, the regular one here, the bolt setup, so you've got your bolt that moves back and forth right here. You've got air being supplied to the shot chamber, which is this section back here. Air is being supplied to the front, which drives the bolt back. When you pull the trigger, air is driven to the other side of the bolt, which drives the bolt forward because the bolt has a sail on it, a sail O-ring. Which is this one right here. So when air pressure is hitting it from this side, it drives the bolt this way. When air pressure hits it from this side, it drives the bolt forward. Now inside of here, you have this stepped area of the bolt tail, and air is being filled up inside the shot chamber right here in between these two O-rings. So you've got this large volume of air being stored inside here. As you pull the trigger, the solenoid applies pressure or applies air to the back side of the sail, moving the bolt forward. When it gets to a certain spot on this step, it's very hard to see, but you can feel it if you run your finger along there. Air that's being held in here is able to get past it and flow out the end of the bolt. So this comes forward, and air is being dumped out the end of the bolt for a set amount of time, for the dwell. Basically, the dwell is how long the solenoid applies air. Well, I'm gonna make this very simple. The dwell is the amount of time that the air is being flown through the bolt. The amount of time that the solenoid is active to apply air to the back of the sail to push it forward and allow air to escape from the bolt. So the longer the dwell time, the longer the bolt is open, and the more air can flow out of it. So as this moves forward, let's say your dwell set super high, the bolt comes forward, air shoots the ball out. It can make the gun inefficient because you're using too much air that you don't need to get a similar process done. So I don't know how many of you understood that, but that's what's happening in there. So on the new bolt, it has a valve built into the bolt assembly itself. Oop. Unscrewing the back of the gun here. I don't want to do that. The back of the bolt. So you've got a couple different sections now. So this is your front can right here, and this is your bolt. So this is your entire bolt, just this piece right here. When before, the bolt actually runs the whole length all the way down to the back down here. So now we've got also our valve assembly, which is right here. So we've got front can, valve body, bolt, and this is part of the can. So air, same thing that happens before. So air is coming in the front of the can to drive the bolt backwards. Air is being supplied to the back to fill the shot chamber and be ready to shoot. When you pull the trigger, solenoid switches air paths, drives it to the back of the sail, moves the bolt forward, and as the pressure that is inside here, the air pressure being used to shoot the ball out the end of the gun, as it drops, the pressure being applied to the back of the valve, which is coming through the back of the valve can right here, allows the valve to slide forward. As it slides forward, it seals the shot chamber so that air can just not dump out the end of the gun anymore. And so the air that would normally just be flowing out the end for a set dwell time, it doesn't need to come out anymore. The valve shuts it, the gun finishes its cycle, and then resets itself. So that's why they say this gun is dwell independent. It does not, obviously it needs to work for a certain amount of time, but changing the dwell around is not going to make the gun more efficient because the valve shuts itself off, keeping that bolt from just bleeding air out the end of it. So pretty cool. Little trick setup there. Let's put this back together. Go. You can see the valve inside there. When air comes in and pulls the bolt backwards, it'll actually pull the valve all the way back. And then when this, I'm not gonna be able to hold this with my finger, I just wanna move forward. As this moves forward and the air comes out here, the pressure that's holding the valve back goes away. So the valve from the backside is able to overcome that and move the valve forward and shut it. And then the bolt retracts back, seals the valve up. So a pretty sweet little bolt system in there. Definitely going to make the gun better on air, which is what everybody's always trying to do. Make sure I screwed these all together. One thing I always see also, guns come in and people don't screw their bolts back together. They've got all these parts of these little sections that need to be screwed together and just, kind of hand tightened. People forget and they don't put them back together. So that's it. That's the whole gun right there. That's a breakdown of it. The colors are slowly becoming available through the website, so I definitely recommend picking up one of these new M3Ss. They're definitely a different gun. A lot of the DMs and the M2s and the M series, they kind of haven't really changed that much. This is a big step forward, so definitely check this out. The M3S from Dye, available through the website. Order yours now through ansgear.com.